Hi and welcome back to Fire Ant Maneuver. In this video, I will briefly talk about terrain, and I chose a very fitting country to do so. I chose Italy, whose troops mainly specialize in rugged, but also skirmishing and a little bit of efficiency. I know we were talking about the efficiency trait in the previous tutorial that went over formations. Here we're going to see how the rugged trait is used and how that interacts with the numerous types of terrain in the game. And also we've actually got a unit that's rugged and efficient, so we can see how that can be quite advantageous as well. I accidentally put a little turn timer on, so I'm gonna have to just refresh the turn real quick. Alright, so there's a few types of terrain in the game. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is the forests, because just in about every single map there's going to be a forest, and so that's going to mean it's a very important terrain type to know. If we select one of our units, we can hover over this terrain piece, and we're going to notice that two little icons appear. A broken wheel, which doesn't seem good, and then what looks to be like two orange little barricades. So we've got barricades but a broken wheel. What the broken wheel is going to mean is it means that our troops are going to get stuck there. It's going to be difficult to get through this forest. So if we jump into the forest and we end our turn, what we'll notice is as these troops enter, we're going to get a pop-up for cover and bog down. So we click on them again and look, we can't move. We could still shoot from this position, but we're kind of bogged down and stuck in this forest. All these trees broke up our line, so it's hard to get all of these troops through the forest. But the other thing you may have noticed was it said soft cover when the barricade icon appeared here. What that means is it's going to reduce all damage received by 1 point. Now, there is a damage floor of 1, and that is to say that damage in this game can't be below 1, so you couldn't reduce a shot to 0. So that said, it's important to remember if somebody is using, let's say, an open order skirmishing formation and they're firing into the forest, you can still be picked off by those skirmishers. But if you've got a large unit of line infantry firing at you and hoping to do 2 damage, they're just not going to be able to do that kind of damage. I also believe if a unit brings in a trait such as range drill, which brings them up from, let's say, 1 base damage if they're in open order to 2, that's just going to get subtracted back down to 1. So this could be quite useful. It's more pronounced on the flanks because, like I said, a unit firing from open order is just going to do the same damage anyways. It's still going to do 1. But if that unit was firing from the flank and hoping to get a +1 on its flanking shot, it's just not going to be the case. So this will be just very helpful in general to hold down a position. Generally, you want to gravitate toward the cover on the map, or if you just notice the enemy has been bombing you with artillery the whole time, or they've got some long-range weapons that you're maybe a bit afraid of confronting, then you can put some guys in the forest. It may seem a bit redundant to put your troops in open order formation while in a forest, but what you're getting here is you are getting the benefit of having that cover, which you already get soft cover. You do get the damage reduction by 1 when you're in open order, so it is slightly redundant, but you still get the side views as well. So you're really making sure you're not taking extra damage, and you get the side range as well. Something that's also important to be said about open order formation, as we talked about in the last video, is that the bonus of open order formation that reduces damage disappears when your cohesion is at 0. So, yeah, it could seem redundant that standing in open order could be the same as standing in a forest, but the moment your cohesion's gone, you're not going to be saving that damage anymore. So it's still useful to put the open order troops in a forest if you really want to make sure they're not going to get damaged. So that's also important to know. But yeah, forests will slow you down. So if you've ever got a map like this where your deployment is cut in half by a forest, it might be good to bring troops like these. And right here we've got selected, what are these guys called? They are the Cacciatori delle Alpi. I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's my best shot. Okay, so unlike these troops, I can actually pop into the forest and just go right through it. So watch as this happens here. They're going to enter the forest. It's going to say soft cover, didn't say bogged down. They just ignore that, and they go right through. So any troops that have the little boot, the rugged trait, means they ignore the terrain penalties. And so bringing some rugged troops on a map that, well, in this case is about a huge river and lots of forests, that might be a great idea. And speaking of these rivers, if we notice all these little rocks and the water getting lighter at the top, these are actually 2 shallow river crossings. So if we move up further, we're going to notice here that just like the forest, we've got the broken wheel, but unlike the forest, we don't have the barricade. You're not getting any cover by standing in the middle of an open river crossing in the shallow river. You're going to be actually quite vulnerable. Units that are stuck in this river crossing, the enemy's going to pick up on that and immediately rush troops over and fire down onto your troops that are stuck in the river. So be very careful when crossing. In this case, though, again, I brought a lot of rugged troops, so I can just go right through it and not have to worry. So that's a huge advantage for countries like the Italians, who really specialize in utilizing rugged. And, you know, one thing I made sure of as a designer was that I wanted to make every country feel unique, and so I like to take a unique trait like efficiency or range drill and try to apply that as much as I can to certain factions to really distinguish them. But one conscious choice that I made is the Italian line infantry. I was going to give the standard line infantry rugged, but I know that the Italians can also rely on the red shirt volunteers, which is kind of an alternative line infantry, and these troops get rugged, and the line infantry doesn't. So the player always has the choice as Italy. It's not completely stuck to playing only on forested maps. If you notice there's not a lot of rough terrain on a map, you can still, you know, Italy's still a viable choice. You can still bring their mainline infantry. But if you notice you're playing on a map like this, maybe you do want to rely more on the red shirt infantry. So Italy can still be versatile in that way. It's not just a one-trick pony. But yeah, okay, so we understand shallow river crossings, we understand forests. Something that's also important to note is this soft cover benefit here that we find in a forest. You can also find that in small villages or fenced-in farmsteads. Now, there's none on this map here. What we'll notice is this is a farmstead, but there's no real fences, and it's just a single home. But if we noticed on some maps, what you'll see is there might be a couple buildings and a stone wall that surrounds a tile. That will give you soft cover, just like a forest will, but it won't slow you down. So that's also very good terrain to use. There's no reason to not utilize that terrain. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the elevation in the game. Now, right now, I've been designing maps just to have the flat tiles and then single hills like this. We do have a second tier of elevation, but I'm not happy with how it came out visually right now. So maybe in the future, you guys will see more maps with that. But all you need to know is that the second tier of elevation is just going to extend all of the bonuses from the first tier of elevation by another. So we'll explain that in just a moment. Let's go see what happens when we stand on this hill. So we're going to move up the artillery here. And you notice my troops typically get, this heavy artillery at least, typically gets 4 range. So if I move him up, and let's see the artillery move up, once we get onto the hill, we're going to notice that all of our range actually increases by 1. So soft cover, forests, and farmsteads are going to protect you, but these hill positions are going to give you such good vantage points that suddenly the cheap 130-point light artillery that you bought becomes heavy artillery. And your heavy artillery you bought for maybe 170 points becomes 200-point modern artillery just because of that range. So if the enemy spent all of their points on this awesome modern artillery that they put in this town, you're going to have the same range as them with heavy artillery on a hill. So you can actually really increase the performance of your artillery units or your infantry, and we'll get to that in a moment, with these hills. So you'll notice here, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 range I can fire directly into the town. The light artillery as well can fire directly on the bridge. So, especially on this map, if you ever play on this map, it's very, very useful to utilize these hill positions. Speaking of this little town here, you might notice a new symbol that's showing up, and this is a golden barricade. This is called hard cover. So hard cover and soft cover are very different. I might put a diagram on screen right now just to show you a little explanation of how it works. But hard cover will reduce your damage received to 0. So that's the one exception where you could be shot and do 0 and receive 0 damage. The only way to damage a unit in range in hard cover is to flank them or use a perk. So if I bring the range drill trait, I will get +1 damage. And so if I frontally shoot a unit in hard cover with range drill, I'll do 1 damage. Alternatively, if I flank their position, I can do the bonus +1 flanking damage or the +2 flanking damage from the rear, but I don't get any base damage. So the most damage I could do with a regular unit shooting at an enemy hiding in the buildings is to flank around them and do 2 damage from shooting them in the rear. That's it. Which normally I would do 4 damage if they weren't in hard cover. So hard cover is the best terrain in the game. And you'll notice any hard cover in the game besides trenches, which you'll rarely see trenches, but any hard cover comes with health bars. Trenches don't. They're actually the best terrain in the game because they're unbreakable hard cover. But in this case, what we'll notice is that these buildings here have health bars. And so when the enemy enters these buildings, we can use artillery to bring down those health bars. Artillery are the only units that can actually destroy buildings. Now, in a future update, something we really want to do is add the ability to fire just on tiles if enemies aren't there. That's something that'll come in very soon, I imagine. But in this build that I'm currently on, I can't target this building unless enemies were in this area. But yeah, usually you can break these buildings down. It'll take 3 shots, 1, 2, 3, and then the buildings will get destroyed, and it'll get demoted down to soft cover. So it's still somewhat useful, but the troops are only going to be able to use the rubble of what was left. Okay, so that's hills, that's hard cover, that's soft cover, and we talked about getting bogged down. I believe that's just about it besides roads, and we'll go over them in just a moment. The last thing I'll touch on too is if you had a second tier of elevation, so if this was a little higher, you'd get another +1 when firing off of this hill. And the other thing too is infantry can even benefit from this hill. So if you're infantry, if you didn't want to spend the 30 points on rifles, you can take a unit with smoothbores and put them on this hill and get 2 range. Alternatively, you could put a unit with rifles on a hill and they'll get 3 range. So if you want to get your sharpshooters on an elevated position, they can fire really far across the map and be great fire support. The last benefit too of hills is that if I have a unit right in front of the hill, I can actually fire over their heads. So I actually get some indirect fire capabilities when on a hill too. So again, putting those sharpshooters on there or some heavy artillery, that could change the entire outcome of the game. Alright, so the last thing that we'll talk about are the roads. That also gives us a chance to show off efficiency again, which is one of my favorite traits in the game. I'll click on one of these units here, I'll put him in marching column. And you'll notice there is a green wheel on this road. Now, roads can't be utilized by cavalry. Cavalry is just going to run where they want to go. Artillery does get to passively use road bonuses. And infantry can only use road bonuses if they're in marching column formation. And if you want to learn more about formations, we did a whole tutorial video on that. But in this case, you can see I jumped into a marching column, and I can go on this road here. Now, normally this column can only go 2 tiles, 1, 2. But now that it said steady ground, now we can see the road bonus being applied. I can fly straight into the city, 1, 2, 3. And notice the city turns gray just so you can see your troops inside and the buildings don't obscure them. So that's just a little, visibility thing to help you see your troops if you enter into a hardcover tile. And that is all of the terrain in the game. So hopefully that explains some things and clears up some of the confusion maybe regarding like the hardcover. I know that's been more of a complicated element of terrain to learn about. But yeah, we've got soft cover, hard cover, bogged down, hills, and roads. I think that's about it. So if you know how to work around all of those terrain elements and bring rugged troops when you know there's going to be a lot of rough terrain, then I think your performance in this game is going to improve massively. Alright, that's it for now, guys. Thank you for listening, and in the next tutorial, I think we're just going to talk about combat, the generalities of damage and combat. So I will see you next time. Thank you.